Antoni, thank you very much for the introduction. I would like, first of all, to thank Antonis and Margarita, and of course, Yorgos Xenis, for extending the invitation to participate at this conference. Then, of course, I thank the audience for staying to the end of this panel. For those being in Cyprus and Greece, it's like 8:30 p.m. on a Friday evening, and I'm sure there are other interesting things to do at this time of the week. Actually, my paper fits quite nicely as a third one after Athenas and Chrysanthis, because it involves a hetera, a courtesan, and also discusses the departure of stereotypes. Comedy humor is produced by play and interplay of an experimentation with departing from stereotypes. The play I'm discussing, the Truculentus, has never been one of Plautus's popular plays. Actually, critics really hate it, and they call it a dark comedy, a disturbing comedy, and with a dark plot, with really no good character, ethically wise. They're all unethical, they're immoral, and it puts forth a cynical depiction of human life. These are some of the descriptions modern critics have given for the Truculentus. And of course, what disturbs them is the lack of the cathartic, so-called amatory ending, the happy ending. The young man marries or manages to be together with his beloved. And it has not been said, but I think that what disturbs critics is the fact that we don't have a male protagonist in this play. So I would argue that in this play, which is actually one of Plautus's last ones, and a play that Plautus really loved, Cicero tells us that it was one of the top 3 in his opinion, we can study the maturation of Plautus's dramaturgy through the involvement of agents from diverse social backgrounds, led by a tightly interacting team of females and the complete marginalization of males. The absence of a clever slave has allowed Phronisium, the clever courtesan, to assume the role of the schemer and compose a play that employs gender to redefine poetics, a plot directed by a woman versus a plot directed by a clever slave, as is the Plautine model. And at the same time revisits social relations from the perspective of lower class women, a group of characters that are seminal in a comedic plot, but rarely in control of comic narrative formation in Plautus's dramaturgy. It should be noted also that the variety of characters and complexity of acting runs contrary to the predictability and conformity that distinguishes the lives of upper class women in Roman society. And speaking of the latter, judging from written evidence, the lives of good women in antiquity must have been quite boring. The number 1 on my handout lists an excerpt from the Laudatio Murdiae, one of the important, very few non-literary Republican references to the lives of women in antiquity. This inscription tells us that praise for all good women is simple and similar, since their native goodness and all the trust they have maintained do not require the diversity of words. The speaker, who is the son of the deceased, argues that his mother deserves greater praise than all others, since in modesty, modestia, probitate, propriety, chastity, obedience, woolworking, industry, and loyalty, she was on an equal level with other good women. Nor did she take second place to any woman in virtue, etc. As the above inscription attests, respectable women are praised for the same few things because their lives are so restricted. In Rome, an epitaph needed only 4 words to mark a good woman. Domum servavit, lanam fecit. She kept house, she made wool. Of course, all the inscribed epitaphs were composed by men and are often highly ideological, but so is the Fabula Palliata, which was a product of male authorship. Though the authors are of low status. And the philosophy of the reversed reality that underscores the plots impacted, I argue, on the portrayal of women's lives and characterization. Thus, in Plautus's communities, women of all classes, especially bad women, speak for themselves and act on their own accord, describing how they lived and are experiencing their lives. The picture resulting is diverse and dynamic, as in several plays and distinctly in the Truculentus, Plautine conventions are both overrun and restored by women. The play begins with a 20-line prologue delivered by an anonymous character who informs the audience that the courtesan Phronisium, Mrs. Brains, an etymological pun made a little later in line 78a, is the leading agent of a grand scheme, for she has pretended to give birth to the son of a certain soldier, Stratophanes. This device is remarkable in that it undermines comedic stereotypes. At the same time, it proves that they do work as plot makers. Even though Emiles Gloriosus never has a child in the comic tradition, and a courtesan never gives birth to one in the course of a play, and actually plans to raise it, the birth of a child is a plot catalyst, and it is used by the scheming Phronisium for this very reason. In the course of the play, mothers seem to return to convention. The baby is truly the offspring of Dinierchos and an anonymous young woman whom Dinierchos raped while intoxicated, as convention held, and whom eventually marries, even though against his will. Interestingly, Phronisium is the agent who orchestrates the return to comic conventionality, the very agent who earlier masterminded an experimental palliata by employing the say baby to overturn and expose convention as a construction of a cultural system forged by males. Throughout the play, women are bad-mouthed by the male characters. In the play's opening scenes, Dinierchos, a full-grown adult in full control of his finances, who nonetheless is cast in the role of the naive adolescents here, articulates the stereotypical male perspective on women's speech by discrediting its reliability and credibility. He also informs the audience through soliloquy that his amica, Phronisium, whose names, as we said, means wisdom, sapientia, line 78, is bad, mala, line 83. A woman who employs her name badly, who pretends, simulat, 86 and 87, and attempts to conceal, celare, line 90, things from him. He extends his disbelief to her whole household. Dinierchos's distrust of women epitomizes a general attitude. Women are not to be trusted. This culmination of this disbelief is recorded later in the play, where it is spelled out that women are credible to citizen men only under torture. Dinierchos's prospective father-in-law, Callicles, beats and binds the Ankylae, and then he orders them twice not to have double tongues, duplicis linguas. Ne duplicis habeatis linguas, ne ego bilinguis vos necem, and threatens them with corporal punishment. And it is only because he is told that what he wants to hear that women's truths may be believed. Working against such prejudice, the women, an invisible citizen daughter, 2 servant girls, a hairdresser, and a midwife, all of them together led by a courtesan, Phronisium, work together to expose male hypocrisy. Truculentus is built around the successive manipulations of Phronisium's 3 most loyal customers, each of whom represents an established comic stereotype. First, we have Dinierchos, whom we have already mentioned, whose substantial fortune nonetheless has suffered, to his full admission, a notable dent as a result of his liaison with Phronisium. Then we have Stratophanes, a braggart soldier from abroad who is laden with the spoils of war. And finally, we have Strabax, an Athenian youth raised in the countryside who is boorish and a simpleton, yet very wealthy. As representatives of the city, the country, and places abroad, the 3 collectively represent all the young lovers in the universe of new comedy. The scenes of Truculentus may seem repetitive in their focus on the lover's gullibility, but that repetition goes straight to the point of this cynical satire. Yet of the 3 lovers, only Dinierchos is self-consciously aware that he's a stereotypical comic lover and a dupe. Item number 3 on the handout. Do you know what makes falling in love our greatest downfall? When we're told what we want to hear, even when it is an outrageous lie, we're foolish enough to take it as the truth, and we foolishly stay calm. From the perspective of Phronisium's household, as articulated by Astaphium, the perspective that is, Phronisium's maid servant, in a monologue that distinctly follows up Dinierchos' monologue that we read earlier, that blames Phronisium for malitia, the words of a courtesan and that of her male freeborn customers are in ongoing competition about who will outsmart the other. Astaphium's opening words in the play describe this rivalry of the male versus female worlds, actually the female courtesan world and the male lover world, very explicitly and very distinctly. And in this quotation, the opening of the monologue, I have marked in bold typeface the personal pronouns, the third plural, they, the men, we, us, the women. It is a rivalry sort, it is a war. When they have arrived, some of them Some one of them is incessantly bestowing kisses while the others are pilfering. But if they see that the one is observing them, they play some trick. There with them is the struggle and the valor to carry off a booty from the plunderers. But we, again, nicely give a like return to those robbers of us, and so on and so forth. It's very, very, very polemic and very explicit of this gender rivalry here. Acknowledged at the very opening, this rivalry is imprinted in the audience as a leading theme of the play. And this is very well illustrated in the way in which the wife and slaves of Callicles, the Senex of the play, and the father of the girl raped by the Nearchus, have worked to keep the old man from learning about his daughter's pregnancy by rape. They cooperate with the women of the house of the courtesan next door, protecting both citizen daughter and citizen infant son. Remarkably, the maid servants remain loyal to the mistress, even under torture. Callicles, on item 5, enters the stage in the fourth act, dragging along two servant women who clearly have suffered torture and interrogation by the old man, who has belatedly learned of the pregnancy. On stage, he threatens to torture them again unless they tell him the rapist's name. Do I use ill language to you, or do I wish you so very ill? According to my ideas, you have both pretty well experienced how mild and gentle a person I am. I interrogated you both as you were lashed and hanging up by the arms. I well remember it. The way in which you quite confessed each point, I know, and so on. On stage, he threatens them, and then their hands shackled, they're held in place by two silent male servants. Notably, the male servants stand up to him, arguing that he, Callicles, is misrepresenting the situation. It is not the fault of the women who hid the pregnancy, but rather of the rapist who overpowered his daughter. When the eavesdropping rapist confesses that he is the one, the culprit, the slaves tartly remind Callicles that he's been unjust because he has innocent women in robes while the guilty man stands free. In this remarkable scene, women who are still feeling the pain of torture show clear thinking about the self-serving logic of bourgeois citizen mores. They speak truth to power using wit and logic to protect other women and to identify the guilty citizen male. My final point, the semiotics of the house, I call. The space is also important, and space in the Truculentus is female space, the house of Aphrodisium, and it is completely controlled by women. The domination of the women over the men is visible in the function of the houses. The house, of course, that dominates the play is the house of Phronisium. Her goal, and the goal of Astaphium, her maid, is to keep as many men as possible in the house, while not allowing the men who are inside to take what other men have given. The traffic in the house is juxtaposed to that before or inside the other house that is visible to the audience, which belongs to Strabag's, the third young lover. Strabag's house seems almost non-existent. By the end of the Truculentus, it is essentially empty, as every male character, Stratophanes, Strabag himself, and Strabag's slave, Truculentus, have all been lured into the house of Phronisium and remain there in her control when the play concludes. Even Dinyrhos, who does not enter Phronisium's house and is to marry another woman, declares with his final words that he will go to the house of Phronisium every time he has the chance. Line 883. It may be claimed in this respect that this quasi-voluntary imprisonment of the men in the house of the courtesan signals the total defeat of the men by the women in the play. Thank you very much for your attention.